The only time I ever enjoyed that kind of culture is when I was a student and when I was sort of like exploring the gay culture of the city where I was at
That's
university.
slightly different, but yeah, I
Yeah,
know what you mean.
that
Yeah,
I enjoyed
yeah.
because there was like there's a sort of like a tribal sense of being around your
I was gonna
people
say it's
in a
probably the only
weird.
time you're gonna be surrounded by like majority gay
Right,
people, isn't it?
right. There
So
is
yeah,
that, and that was kind of cool. That was really interesting. I enjoyed that. I did enjoy that. It's the only time I've ever been to like clubs and things and really, really enjoyed it. Um, but it's not a culture that interests me massively, I've got to say.
no,
In general, it's just not my thing.
no, it's never been mine. I think the drinking's a lot of it, but also
Hmm.
the just not understanding the point of it.
Yeah.
But that attitude of not understanding the point from it comes from earlier. Like I remember in being a teenager when people would um, quotation marks hang out
Oh yeah.
where you just like stand on a street corner
I'm
somewhere.
like,
Yeah, why? Why are we
right.
doing this? Are we going
I
to someone's house? Are we going to
right.
play a game? Are we going to watch a film? Why are we just standing here? I can't be doing with
I
that.
never did that. And
Me,
I
same
remember
here. Yeah,
when like some of the people, I counted as friends at the time started doing that.
same here.
And I was
Yeah.
like, I remember looking at it and thinking, this is entirely contrived. You're doing this because everybody else is doing it. And I thought you had more nous than that.
Yeah,
Do you know what
it's
I mean?
disappointing, isn't it, when those people who you thought were kind of more like you end up being
Yeah,
not. Yeah,
but we're just, I mean, even if they don't even have to be like me, just more themselves, just more.
yeah.
They had more. I
Oh no, I mean like you
thought,
in the sense of like willing to not just
yeah,
follow the crowd and that kind of
right.
thing. Yeah,
That was disappointing. I've got to say. I think that kind of thing was like part of what pushed me apart from a lot of people when I was in like high school.
yeah, same here.
Because it's
Yeah.
like I don't want to be around that. I
I
just,
never saw the point of it. I still don't. What are we doing? I like
yeah.
an action. I like an activity. I like to know what I'm doing. It's
Hmm.
why, like this last year, probably not this year either, but I was meant to be doing a couple of conventions sort
Hmm.
of behind the table as an author for the first time.
Right, right.
Now, I don't like going to conventions as a rule.
Hmm.
It's too much going on. It's too busy. I find it a
Yeah.
bit sort of overwhelming.
Yeah, yeah.
But this I was all right with this because I had a purpose.
Hmm.
There was something for me to do. I
Yeah.
was going to stand behind that table, sign books for people, answer questions, do the counting the money, all that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
So having a job there removed all that social discomfort. Whereas when I'm
Right.
just walking to this big arena thing,
Hmm.
I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do with myself.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So having a job there, an actual thing to do, immediately sort of makes me feel better about it. And
Right,
that's why
right.
things like the just hanging out or
Yeah.
going on a night out where there isn't a specific thing to do. I can't
Hmm.
deal with that at all.
Likewise, it is just. I mean, and don't get me wrong. If people who do get something out of it, fine.
Yeah, yeah. If
It's
it's good for you, then fair enough.
right.
But
It's
yeah,
just not my thing, it's just not my arena. I mean, the only time I really like going out to the places like pubs and whatnot is if it's going to be really intense. If I'm like with a friend or a group of friends who I know I can chat with, I know I can have a
yes.
really good conversation with.
Oh, yeah, but you can't talk in clubs.
No, that's it.
That's
That's it.
different. Yeah,
That's it.
yeah. The pub is very different from a
Hmm.
club. And if you're going to a pub and you're stopping in one pub all night,
Yeah.
that's fine. I can do that.
Hmm.
But it's the pub crawl is not intended to be having
No.
conversations. You are doing that to get bladdered. So that
Yes.
again, there's nothing in that for
There's
me.
nothing in that for you. I mean, I do. I mean, I do like a drink every now and then, but I never really get like, you know, bladdered. I never really
Yeah.
get completely. By the way,
Well,
guys, welcome to Strange Playgrounds. We are going to be chatting. We do have, but a specific subject, but we kind of got into it as we do. As you know the nature of this show by now.
you should hope so.
Surely you.
Yeah.
I like to think, Lex. I like to think that we give bang for the people's buck. I like to think we give a little extra. You
I
know,
just think it's better than having a cold opening where you
I
just
just
come
don't.
straight in and like right
I
a
don't.
topic, and
I
that's
don't
it's
like
not
it.
natural,
I
is
don't
it?
like it. I don't like. You know what? When I listen to podcasts, I don't like listening to it. You know, when
No,
you
I'm the
know there's a
same.
format, and
Yeah,
it's just like, oh, they're just like, they're just conforming to the format. There's no natural flow or anything.
no, it's like a script, isn't it?
It's
Yeah, I'm
boring.
not.
It's boring. I don't
Yeah,
like it. I like a little bit of natural flow in what
yeah,
I
so
do.
do
You
I.
know. But yes, by the way, ladies and gents, as you can probably tell from the title, it's a kind of a special day for Lex today, is it not, Lex?
Yeah, I suppose you could say
It's
that. Yeah,
kind of a special day. I mean, it is. It is the release day of your short story collection, Whistling Past the Graveyard. Yeah.
it is. Yeah, it's out on paperback and ebook format today.
Yeah. Which, by the way, guys, links as per usual, links below, and also to Rebbie's blog as well, down below. Oh, hi, Rebbie, you're here too.
I am.
So, oh, guys, you might remember Rebbie from the Child's Play video that we did. Guys, that was 20 days ago.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
Oh,
yeah,
that's flown on it.
that's
Time's just
scary.
weird at the moment. In some ways, it's going quick, but in some, it's not. It's just like
It's
all bleeding into each other at the moment.
even it's the weirdest
Mm.
thing. I mean, I understand, like, you know, because of the way things are, a lot of people have lost their sense of time. But I've been going to work throughout. It's all been pretty much the same, barring, you know, one or two upheavals. But I'm losing my sense of time too. I keep getting to work and not knowing what time it is or what day it is or what the
Yeah,
schedule is. It's like, it's scary stuff, man. It's scary stuff.
it is. Yeah, yeah. But you haven't got
But
any of the markers, have you?
no,
So
no. But it is. I mean, I spoke about this on the last episode of Strange Playgrounds I did, which was just me waffling on. It is, I believe, going to be a very good time for horror media and fiction very soon. This is the kind of situation where it tends to effloresce in the aftermath.
yes,
So who knows? Who knows? Maybe we will get that new rise. You know how we got after. It's difficult to draw a line, isn't it? Where was the last one? I mean, you could. Most people say the last sort of golden age of horror was from the end of the 1960s right up to the mid 1980s
yes,
because
yeah,
of lots of different influences and whatnot. And that's definitely the period where it crested last. Where you
yeah.
got like the luminaries, essentially. You got the people who are now accounted to be like the saints of horror, the postmodern saints of horror.
Clive Barker, Stephen
Clive
King, Ramsey
Barker,
Campbell.
Rams,
That's yeah,
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 all of those
yeah.
guys, you know, the absolute luminaries. Maybe we're starting to see the beginning of a new wave.
Could do as long as it's not all about COVID
I
and
no, I
zombies.
mean,
You know,
I don't think it will be. I think what we'll get is like it will be metaphorically. You know, it'll be in the same way that like a lot of the fiction from sort of in from the mid 1970s after is basically all about Vietnam.
and a lot of the 50s sci-fi stuff is about the atomic bomb
Yeah,
without being about the atomic bomb and that kind of
exactly.
thing. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
I think that's what we're going to see. I really do. And it's not just going to be about COVID metaphorically either. It'll be about all the upheavals.
Would it be good if we got some sort of natural thing that was a bit more like, you know, like how good would it be if it's the next thing that happened that meant you had to stay in your house instead of a disease, if it actually was like giant ants?
Wow.
Did you think that'd be much more interesting?
Well, that would be preferable. Somehow, in a weird, bizarre way, wouldn't that be preferable?
Oh, I'd love to have Boris Johnson on news. You can't go out again. We're at level 3.
Right, right. No, you
You know.
know, yeah, this area of the UK is swarmed at the moment, I'm
Yeah.
afraid. So,
No, he'd be like Ken Brockman on news, Boris, and be like, I, for one, welcome our new insect
yeah, yeah.
overlords.
I like the fact that you went immediately for one of my favourite examples from that area, which is them.
Them's brilliant, isn't
It's
it? Because
great.
it's. I don't know why it's good, because it shouldn't be, but it just
Oh,
is.
it should be
It's,
shite.
yeah.
It should be absolute wankery of the first order because it's like it's so cheesy. It's
Yeah.
so it's so of its era. The ant puppets, well, the ant puppets, you know, the ant puppets. But it's really good.
Yeah,
It's
it
like
is.
it's actually weirdly scary. I don't know why it is.
Was it the first kind of post-atomic fear thing?
I don't think it was the first, but it's I don't know what it is about the film. I don't know why it is so. Have you seen them, Rebbie?
I'm not sure I have, to be honest.
The
I've seen some similar things where there's something out there and you've got to be quiet and you've got to stay in and stuff, but I
yeah.
don't think I've seen that particular one.
Oh, it's great. It's a black and white film, and it is the template for all
Oh,
of
very
those
much.
sort of
Yeah.
like post-nuclear, mutated monster films. Certainly in the West, anyway.
I
And
always like The Blob as well
The Blob's
because
great fun.
I love the casting on that
Hmm.
because he's blatantly. It's my mind's just gone blank. What's his name? The actor? It's Steve.
It's not
Is it
Steve.
Steve
I was
McQueen?
gonna say it's Steve McQueen, isn't it?
It is
Yeah,
Steve McQueen.
yeah,
Yeah, my mind went blank then. Yeah, he's blatantly way too old to be
yeah,
playing this sexy teen,
yeah,
but the
yeah,
casting director obviously wanted him, and he's
yeah,
about 42. And
yeah.
there's this brilliant scene where a police officer who looks about 20
Mm.
pulls him over and he's like, "Oh, you no good punk kid," and you're like, "He's about 15 years older than you." But he's meant to be this teenager.
Yeah, I know.
It's just really jarring when you
It,
when you look at it in hindsight.
but it's like one of the tropes of that era, isn't it? Like
Oh yeah.
everyone playing like a teenager in cinema in that era is at least 30.
Well, it's even in Greece, which isn't in the 50s, but it was
Right.
set in the 50s.
Yeah.
Everyone's blatantly about 30 odd.
Right,
Yeah,
right. It's the Judy Garland approach, isn't it?
yeah,
Oh
yeah.
God, let's not go down that road. Jesus, I just love Judy. I love her life. I love her like just the any of the biopics about her is just the best. Anywho, yes, Lex short story collection. I mean,
Yes.
there is a kind of natural segue here, I suppose, because certainly from my reading of it, what really struck me about Whistling Past the Graveyard, it's like a roadmap of all of your influences.
Yeah, I suppose it is really because there isn't like I didn't want to stick to a particular sort of tone or
Right,
genre or like have them all feel a certain way. It's
right.
very much meant to feel like a selection box of like with chocolates where oh that one's
Yes,
caramel and then that one's praline and that one's they're
I
not
am.
the.
I'm so glad you said that because I use that exact metaphor in my review.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I basically say Lex has provided us like an assortment box of chocolates and said just take what
Yeah,
you like. Because I loved, for me, what I really liked was the way, like, you read the first story, the Shape Off the Bow, and you think, oh, it's going to be like a Gothic collection then. It's going to be like Stoker, it's going to be Victorian, it's going to be really dark and traditional and mythological. And then the next story, it's postmodern.
yeah,
Really postmodern to the point whereby you've got a gay protagonist. And it's
yeah.
like, whoa, okay. There's this wonderful sort of like pulling the rug out from under the reader, which I like.
Yes,
I
yeah, I'm
enjoyed
all
that.
about that. I don't like just getting comfortable,
No.
anything like that. Particularly with, I mean, I don't like horror in the sense of like gritty, violent
Mm.
horror. Everything I do is a bit more sort of pulled back from that.
Hmm.
But I still don't like the reader to get too comfortable with it.
Yeah,
You know?
I know exactly what you mean, and I mean for horror, I would argue that's essential.
Yes,
I
I would think
don't.
so too.
I may sound like an absolute horror snob here, which fair enough, fair dues. If you want to level that accusation, fair enough. But I don't have any time for horror that isn't gonna shock me a little bit, or just
Yeah.
surprise me a little bit, or at least unsettle me.
Yes, I know exactly what you
Do
mean.
you
Yeah,
know what I
fully.
mean? And that's from my reading of Whistling Past the Graveyard. That's what I got. It's like it's not just the stories in and of themselves, but it's the way they're structured. It's the way they're put together. So there is like this contrast of flavor between them,
Yes.
which is really cool. I like that.
Well, thank you. That was very much the intention
Hmm.
to just completely do a mix match of everything. The second story that you mentioned, I think that's the one set in the lodge, isn't it?
That's the one. That's the
Yeah,
one.
I didn't decide the order, so I'm
Lodge
just
three
trying to
two
remember
eight.
which. Yeah,
Lodge 328. Yeah.
that is based on my annual sort of pilgrimage to Centre Parks.
Yes.
It's blatantly meant to be
Yeah.
Centre Parks, but because Centre Parks is very much my sort of like happy place. It's
Uh-huh.
very comfortable. It's relaxed. It's pure pleasant memories there. I thought again, removing that comfort, I thought, what about just having something a little bit subversive
Yeah.
about this? Which is why the protagonist in that is there on his own.
Yes.
Because I think if he was there in a group of mates, like when I go, you wouldn't have the same ability to make it unnerving.
No.
So, and I think there's something, I like the idea of going on a holiday on your own, but there is also a slight constant air of discomfort about it.
Yeah.
Because you're on your own, you're in a place that's not your home, you don't know anyone there, you're far away from anyone that you do know. So there is always that slight apprehension about it.
There's also that wonderful central image, which is like so M.R. James, you know, it's if there's like a unifying factor through the stories that I perceived, it was the influence of M.R. James, you know.
Oh yeah.
The gate in Lodge 328 that's just there. It's like just in the middle, like just on the outskirts of the woods outside his lodge, and it doesn't connect to anything.
No.
It's a great image.
That is based on, there is not a gate, but there is a wall there's a woods near where I live. I have actually been for a walk there with Rebecca before, so she might remember it, but there's like a wall that's like half collapsed and seemingly attached to nothing.
Yeah.
Whatever it was attached to is obviously long gone. But it's just there.
It's very cool, isn't it? I mean, it's like it's incongruous, it's strange, but it's something I imagine most British people will understand because it isn't uncommon to see that kind of thing.
Even like in the middle of cities as well, you'll have like half a building that was at one point a Victorian mill, and now they're not allowed to knock it down because it's listed. But everything else around it is some modern high-rise thing, and then there's just this bizarre old factory thing stuck in the middle of it.
That's exactly what I recalled reading this. When you draw the image of the gate, I immediately flashed back to university, like the bus ride to university. We used to pass like, I don't even know what it used to be, but all there was in this lot of land was a doorway. Just like a door with nothing.
Yeah, that's weird.
Nothing around it at all. No connecting walls, nothing. Just this door.
There is in Sheffield, Rebecca, you've probably seen this, near Hoyle Street, near the, you know that antiques and collectibles shop I've took you to before? Where you can buy out the old toys and stuff. There used to be a massive office building, and at the back of it, there's just this old Victorian kiln, just a massive red brick kiln that itself is a listed thing. But everything surrounding it is like offices and tool shops, but there's just this big red brick, black soot stained kiln just in the middle of it. And if you're from somewhere that's a much newer country like New Zealand or America or something, that just looks so weird to you.
It's odd, isn't it? It's weird, but again, like, British people will understand.
Yes,
because that stuff is everywhere, regardless of where you come from. It's so weird. It reminds me a little bit of like, did you guys ever see the BBC adaptation of Neverwhere, Neil Gaiman's Neverwhere?
No, I didn't watch that.
Well, in that, they actually went on site in London. So, like, the whole notion, the whole sort of conceit of Neverwhere is that there's London above and there's London below, London Underground. And London Underground is like all of the old areas of London, like the abandoned subway tunnels and the abandoned like hotels and things that are just in the old Victorian hotels that are still there. They're still in the middle of London, but they've been built up and around, and they're like, the floors have fallen through in the middle of them, and they actually went and filmed in these places.
That's brilliant.
And it's so cool. It's so cool to think that these places are there.
Yeah.
All these secret, slightly profane places that are rotting and falling down and that no one would ever know about, but which are there.
Yeah, that's really good.
It's creepy, and that's what this story recalls to me, anyway.
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad about that. It's very intentional.
I was going to ask, is like, because you never know as a reader, is it, you know, am I picking this stuff up or am I sort of imposing it on the text? You know?
Sure, yeah.
But I was going to ask, did you like draw on all of these influences deliberately?
I did definitely think of the kiln, and I thought about the wall that's in the woods near my house, just because that feeling of what even is that?
Yeah.
And I also the idea, because not to give the story away, but basically what happens in the story that we're talking about is this guy goes to this like holiday lodge place, which for argument's sake is just like Centre Parks.
Yeah.
And the lodge that he's staying in, around the back in the woods, there's just this gate that's not attached to anything. It's just there. But it's known about because when you go to a place like Centre Parks, you get an instruction book which tells you how to get food, how to do this, how to do that, the safety stuff. And in his book, it says there's a gate in the woods at the back of you. Leave it closed and locked.
Yeah,
that's it.
It's
doesn't
kind
say why.
of
Doesn't
like
say nothing else. It's just
casual, isn't it?
Yeah,
and,
it's very much in the tone of everything else that's in the lodge, in the lodge book. Yeah,
and I loved one of the things that made me laugh in the story is the fact that like this is known about.
Yeah,
this is actually not just in terms of like they know it's there; they actually know its significance as well.
Yeah.
So they just I love
just think
that.
There's something very sort of capitalist about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, we know there's an Indian burial ground. I mean, it isn't an Indian burial ground, but for argument's sake, we know there's an Indian burial ground here, but we still want to build this building. So we'll just put something on it saying, by the way,
we're just going to ignore like the weird metaphysics of it. We're just going to ignore that because we've got a business to run.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. That just seemed very realistic to me.
Yeah.
That you know. And that was also, I wrote this story a while ago, but I've been playing a video game recently called Control, which is
a good one.
It's good, and it basically it's like the X-Files if the X-Files was a fully funded department of government rather than just two people working in a basement. You know, so it's like they've got a full budget, they've got a full office building, they've got a full staff. But my favourite thing about that is that because this organisation within the government has been going on for so long, it's kind of treated with a level of like mundaneness to it. So like you read all these like memos and office emails and stuff. Like there's an email that someone's put say something like, the next time you bring a haunted skull into the office, can you please cleanse it before you put it in the cupboard? Because I'm sick of all the furniture moving around. You know, just like a generic office memo, but it's about a possessed object.
Yeah.
You know, just things like that.
And it just I liked that because like most of the story is kind of straight, isn't it? You know, it's played straight for horror, but there is this layer in that one particularly of like a subversive humor going on.
There is, yeah, but it's just the mundaneness that it speaks to, the fact that these people deal with this stuff every day, so it's just become a part of their job.
Right.
So it's admin, it's bureaucracy, it's everything else. And I think with the gate in the lodge story, it's kind of the same in that if you worked there and that this campsite thing has been there for like 40 years now, you know, there's a gate right back of Lodge 328, leave it shut. And that's it. It's just a part of your job now.
I loved that. Yeah, I mean the other one that gave me a chuckle was Seance.
Yes.
Seance, like what I got from Seance is like most of it is like it's Lovecraftian sort of M.R. James horror. Yeah. And by the way, I got the M.R. James reference with the monster. That's brilliant.
Oh, God.
I definitely got that. But there was a bit in it that really made me laugh, and it was like the escalating body horror. You know, where everything kicks off and it gets gross, and then it gets really gross, and then you've got like half dissolved corpses pulling people off their chairs and like breaking. That gave me such a chuckle. It works really, really well. You know, it got the kinetic energy in the story reminded me a little bit of the way Sam Raimi does his horror films.
Yes, very much, yeah. I wanted it to start very similar to what Sam Raimi does, actually. That story was supposed to feel like the very beginning of it is very sort of grounded and could be in real life, but then by the end, it's just insane
it's bonkers.
And horrific. Yeah.
It's like bonkers, and it like escalates. Like early on, it actually reads like it's going to be a really serious, again, sort of Victorian horror story.
Yes.
A really serious one, where you're maybe going to get like the doubter, the skeptic, having his eyes opened a little bit about things.
Yeah.
But it doesn't go there. It goes like into the wild, wacky places, which I really, really liked. You know.
Yeah, I just decided I like this idea of having something like a bit like. Almost like an Agatha Christie story where you've got a bunch of people locked in a room and they're all the different characters. You've got the drunk, you've got the lech, you've got all of that. And then something happens. But like you say, imagine like adding this like a horrific horror element to those characters.
Yeah.
Instead of just like some cozy Sunday afternoon murder, you've got something much worse than that.
Much worse and
You
more
know,
graphic. Yeah.
yeah,
It's like so much more graphic. I mean, one of the things I got up until that point, there are graphic elements to the other stories up until that point, but nothing quite like that. Certainly
yes.
nothing to that extent.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the most sort of body horror things in there, really,
Mhm.
with the stuff and the method of death and all that kind of thing. And there is very much like an escalating desperation to that story as well,
Oh yeah.
in the sense of it kind of gets worse as it goes on, and everyone who attempts to get out of the
Yeah.
situation, not only does it end badly for them, but it kind of strips the hope away of the survivors
Yeah.
because, you might be thinking, oh, maybe I could make it to the door in time. But then you see someone else try exactly that and it doesn't work
Mhm.
for them.
Mhm.
So now you don't do that either. And your options for removal from the situation get smaller with each other person who dies.
Yeah, and I mean you've also got the metaphysics of the story, of course, which is Lovecraft again, isn't it? It's this notion that even like the medium that ends up sort of causing the problem, even she doesn't know what's really
No.
going on or how to control it. So it's really dark and despairing in that regard.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I like the idea of having the medium as a legitimate medium as well,
Yeah.
rather than someone who's just bullshitting like
No, she
VCR
actually
and usually,
does. She could do stuff, but it just
doesn't fully
doesn't.
understand it.
Right,
Yeah.
it just doesn't go quite right this evening, does it? It goes awry,
No.
basically.
Yeah.
And actually, not through any fault of her own.
No, it's not her fault. She was
Funnily
very
enough.
clear about what you needed to do to get that. The element that I put in there, which I was really pleased with because it just fell together really well, is the idea that if this is real, if psychic energy and all that kind of thing is a real thing, it
Uh,
would have to work like any other science.
you're
So if
right.
you're doing a science experiment, you're going to put this and this and this together, and this should happen. If someone gives you a bottle of X instead of a bottle of Y,
Hmm.
that result is going to be completely different.
Right,
So
right.
if you're doing a séance and you believe you've got a specific 10 people around that room, but
Mhm.
actually one of them isn't who you think they are,
Right,
that
right.
mixture of psychic energy is going to be different, and you don't know what the result's going to be there.
These guys definitely don't. I think all of
Yeah,
them end up quite surprised by the end of it.
yeah,
But it's like for me, it's the escalation that surprised me, which I imagine is totally intentional because you assume the story's going to go a certain way. You know,
yes.
you
Well,
as-
yeah, I wanted it to escalate.
it's
Yeah, very
drawn
much.
like the early parts of the story are drawn in such a particular way that you feel like you're in familiar hands. It's like, oh right, so it's this kind of story, yeah.
Yeah, I
And then
think
it's
so.
it's
I quite
kind of
like to do
not.
that.
It's
Yeah,
kind of not. It goes off. It just it was the way it starts to spiral, and then it just goes and keeps going and going and going and going, and by the end it's so like out of control, and I kind of loved that about it.
yeah, it was fun to write that
I,
one,
I can
definitely for
imagine
that.
I can imagine when it got going, when it started to spill out into just like, right, this is gonna get gory, mad, crazy. Let's
Yeah,
just let it go. I enjoyed it very, very much, that one. And it's like it's it's kind of counterpointed by certain other stories, like the one that stood out for me in terms of like its metaphysics was the Hangman's Sojourn,
oh yes,
because
yeah, you
that
like that one, didn't you, Rebecca? In your review, I think that was one of your pointed out
Yeah,
ones
that
that you
was
said.
one of the ones that I picked out. Yeah. Um, Funnily enough, actually, all of the ones that I picked out from our review are picked out for the same kind of reason as what George has already said about the others, but they are very different stories to the ones that we've already talked about. So like, I find that some of your stories are very M.R. James,
Mhm.
Yeah,
and that's part of what I like about them, and also the fact that even like, no matter what's going on, no matter how horrific it is that you're reading or anything like that, it's always a very, very calm sort of narrative to it, which makes it sort of easier reading than some books.
yes, I know
Yeah,
what you
Do you know
mean.
what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah. There's like a controlled quality to the prose in these stories, isn't there? It's really interesting actually, because it's like it contrasts massively with the way that I write. You know, I write in this kind of like impressionist way that's crazy and is not to everyone's taste at all, you know? Whereas I find Lex's writing is very controlled. It's everything
Yeah.
is very specific, everything is very, very particular. I mean, the Hangman's Sojourn is what got me about it is how folkloric it was. You
Yes.
know, I know this kind of story. It's like Der Erlkönig, you know, the opera. It's a very sort of classic archetype. The ostensibly damned soul who's being pursued, who finds some kind of redemption, and it works really well. But what I liked about it more than anything was the fact that all of the other stories, the metaphysics is nihilistic. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
no hope. In fact, a
No.
lot of the time you get downright nasty with it. You know, you get downright nasty with it. This one, it's the opposite.
Yes.
And the fulcrum,
There's a very redemptive arc through that one. Yeah.
yeah, and the fulcrum of the redemption is the relationship. It's that
Yes.
relationship
Yeah.
that occurs between the two central characters, you know, where you've got the carriage driver who is, it seems to me, incorruptible.
Yes.
Like the uncorrupted soul, essentially, and the fulcrum of the highwayman's ultimate redemption.
Yes. Yeah. I toyed with the idea of whether or not to make him a spiritual character,
Yeah.
the coach driver or something. But ultimately, I thought you don't need to,
No.
because this highwayman encounters this dude for all of about an hour and a half.
Yeah, it's
And
like,
you only get a brief glimpse of him. And he's been extra polite and kind because he's probably scared of this guy putting a bullet in his head. So you can see him through this lens of him seeming impossibly kind and perfect, and you know that's fine. It doesn't need much more elaboration than
no, it
that.
doesn't. And I mean, if he were a metaphysical agent, it would probably make it seem too coercive, you know?
I think so. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
with him as just a genuinely decent human being, which is what he is, it means that the highwayman's ultimate decision is his, you
Yes.
know? And I also love the fact that you got bar guests in there. You
Oh,
actually,
I'm a fan of them. Yeah.
yeah. So like you've got these, but that's another thing I found about the whole collection. Actually, the other influences that you draw on, other than like the writers and the that have influenced you. There's like the folklore and the mythology that's in there.
Yeah, I like to pick out things that might like. I love all types of horror monster, but I'm not that fond of writing the classics.
Right.
Like I'll rarely do vampires. I'll rarely do werewolves. I'll if I do ghosts, I try to do them in a slightly different way. Or
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of zombies to write about, because I just find it difficult to do something that hasn't already been done.
Absolutely.
So something like a bar guest, which is, if you don't know, it's basically like a ghost dog
Yeah.
that haunts people on the moors.
They're supposed to
that
come
kind of
for like damned souls, aren't
exactly,
they?
yeah,
They
they are.
harass sinners basically.
If you're walking out in the open at night across open fields of land, they are, and you are like an unconfessed sinner, then they're like drawn to you like a shark to blood,
Yeah.
basically, and that's what happens. The location, which is the title of that the story, the Hangman's Sojourn, is based on, there's a pub about a 15-20 minutes drive from where I live called the Strines.
Right.
Have you been there, Rebecca? It's not that far from where you live either.
I have, yeah. It's a lovely pub, that, actually. It's in nice surroundings as well. That's the one that I thought of when I read it.
Yes, because it's literally in the middle of nothing.
Yeah,
There's just,
yeah.
it's one of those that when it was built, and that pub has been there since the 12th century.
Right. Whoa, God.
When it was built, it will have been on the path of, travellers had come past in the horse and cart, stop off there again, But now it's just fields and fields and fields for miles and a road. So there's nothing anywhere near it.
Oh, that sounds great.
And the sign for it is brilliant, because it's a proper old Victorian sign, and you pass the sign about a mile before you get to the pub. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that the sign is just like 10 square miles of fields and then a sign in middle saying the Strides pub this way. And that there's something, particularly if you drive past that sign at night,
Yeah.
there's something really otherworldly about that. About
Yeah.
nothing, 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 nothing. Oh, there's a pub.
You
And
almost
that's,
it almost
you know,
would make you feel as though you are in a story, wouldn't it? Because
yes,
it's almost like a mythological thing to happen.
it is. But I bet that's quite common in many British country areas, though, where you
Yeah.
just get a pub that's in the middle of nothing else at all.
Oh,
Because,
absolutely.
you
Yeah.
know,
Well, it happens
but
even with stuff like if you ever drive around like the Derbyshire Peaks or places like that, you'll just come to these. They're not even villages. They're just like
yes,
a couple of houses in the middle of nowhere.
yeah,
It's the
yeah,
oddest, strangest thing.
yeah. Well, that was kind of the inspiration for the pub itself. Is that idea of just that when I the last time I went there, I thought it was weird how
Mm.
there's just nothing around it. So I liked that idea of just coming across one, but then the rest of the story is very much. I wanted to do something with a highwayman,
Yeah.
and I love ghost dogs and such on
Mm.
the moors. Anything like that, I always think is quite a creepy, very British feel. I know Barghest is German, but still,
Yeah.
that idea has got a very old European feel
Oh
to
my
it,
God,
shall we
yeah. I
say?
mean, it's definitely one of those mythologies that's permeated like Anglo-Saxon folklore. You'll find
Yes.
stories like that, like all over these islands, all over these
There was
islands.
there was another local newspaper story about a panther recently.
It
It
wasn't your
wasn't. It
cat, was
wasn't
it?
Mort this time. No, last time there was one. It was him. I'm positive it was him, but it isn't this time because it's not quite near enough
Uh,
to where I live. But yeah, it made me laugh when I saw it in the news again this time.
I mean, funnily enough, it's the kind of story that's morphed into cryptozoology
It
now, isn't
has.
it? You
It's
know?
become like a physical creature that people think is the
Right.
origin of it. And it used to be like a barghest or like black dogs, which
Mm,
is like a mythological thing in British culture as well.
right.
That's what the Hound of the Baskervilles is based on, isn't it? Is the
Yeah.
black dog thing. But they used to be seen as like a spiritual thing that was walking about in the
Yeah.
form of a dog or whatever. Whereas now, like you say, it's a cryptid thing where people think it's a physical
Yeah.
entity, like an animal that just hasn't been identified yet.
Right. So, like a species of wolf, maybe a wild dog of
Yeah,
some
yeah,
description, that kind of thing. And there's space for that to be the case, I suppose.
yeah, yeah.
If not, the fact that we've killed 40% of our wildlife in the UK, but hey ho, it almost
Yeah.
makes you wish there were bar guests, doesn't it?
It'd be interesting, wouldn't it, if there were
Yeah.
something like that? Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, and it is the kind of mythological image that resonates with certainly sort of European and UK readers who have this folklore just permeating our collective unconscious.
yes, yeah. It's something that everyone knows about, but you can't quite place the first time you heard about it.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah.
it's just kind of there in your head. Yeah,
But once again, it's the the Hangman's Sojourn got me because it's so different. Like
yeah,
metaphysically, for me, the Hangman's Sojourn was almost like the fulcrum point of the collection. Where it's that brief little light that sparks amongst the darkness.
yeah. The rest of them are very Jamesian in that, like, well, you shouldn't have done this, and now you're fucked. Sorry.
Well, well,
The
you
rest
go.
of them kind
I
of
mean,
follow that.
it's kind of bastardly in a way, but you go directly from the Hangman's Surgeon to my favourite in the collection, by the way, the Wreaths of Wellbridge.
Oh, is that your favourite one?
Yeah, I
Okay.
liked that one. I liked that one a lot. It reminded me so much of the kinds of horror stories I was encountering in like when I were like in the early 2000s, when you were getting things like the Mammoth books of British horror, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
It reminded me so much of that, of like again I imagine another like set of your influences like Ramsey Campbell. It had that feeling
yeah.
it had a Ramsey Campbell feeling, kind of Dennis Wheatley as well.
Oh, yeah, definitely. There was a definite Wheatley influence in that. Yeah,
Definitely, yeah,
yeah.
with like the not to spoil too much, but like the cultish vibe.
Yes.
The notion of there being a culture that still exists, which is very archaic, but which
Yeah.
exists beneath the veneer of modernity.
Yes.
And that
Well,
note,
that's.
yeah,
I think Wicker Man does that most famously, but I think
definitely.
it's not. It's far from the only example of that. But I think Wicker Man is the most famous one of
Definitely.
that.
And I think when people read this, that's probably the first touchstone they'll come to be honest.
Yeah, that's fair enough. It's
That's
not a bad comparison.
not at all, not at all. It was my favorite as well because I liked the blitheness of the postmodern characters who were sort of blundering around, not really understanding what they were doing,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And you're just waiting. You know
Yeah,
it's going to kick
you know
off.
this is going bad. Yeah,
Right.
you see it before because we exist in a world where we've watched horror films.
hmm hmm
You always have to bear that in mind with characters in
Yes.
films. Like when people say, "Oh, why don't he just do this?" and you think, "Well, in their world, he
Mm.
doesn't know he's in a horror film."
Right, right. And also you have to bear in mind in his world, in their world, they're doing their job. It's
Yeah,
really mundane. It's actually really boring. They don't have that context, that God's eye context where they're like,
correct.
ooh, you know. So
Yeah,
like when the cameraman, the first night they stay in Wellbridge, where he goes back to the dig site to get his camera battery,
yeah.
you're like, no, don't do that. Don't do that. That's a really bad idea, man. And it
Yeah,
turns
it
out to
is.
actually
Yeah,
be a fairly bad idea, you know.
yeah.
But of course, he doesn't have that context. I mean, the only thing he's
No,
had happen is a weird, like, technological disturbance in his camera.
yeah.
That's it. So,
I
I mean,
wanted to try and keep it subtle in the
mm,
early stages of that, so it's
yeah,
things that you, as per M.R. James, which Rebecca mentioned, she
yeah,
feels a lot of in this story. In these stories, sorry, it's that you can't. The kind of the unwritten rule with M.R. James stories is that most of the occurrences early in the story
mm,
have to be something that you could actually explain away
yes,
rationally.
yeah,
You don't have the full on, here's a ghost standing in front of me.
yeah.
You don't have that until the end.
No, you let it
Early on, it's
build.
got to be that door just opened on its own.
Mm,
Could have been a draft, could have been creaky floor, could have, but it could have been someone opening it as well.
right.
You've got to have the alternative rational
Yeah,
explanation as a possibility in the early
absolutely,
events. So his
absolutely.
camera always goes fucked when he stood at this dig site.
Yeah.
Might just be the power lines going above it or something.
Right.
There's a potentially rational explanation
Well, I
for it
think
there.
like the paleontologist you've got there, he explains that it could be like metal deposits
Yes.
in the
Yeah.
ground, in the dig site, and it's like, well, yeah, absolutely,
I,
it could
I
be that.
love these bullshit explanations in horror films though, where like someone will say, "I just saw a monster with 18 tentacles come out of the swamp
Mm.
and rip that boat to shreds," and someone will be like, "Oh, it's a swamp gas," and you're
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
"What? How?
Oh,
How is this?"
it definitely wasn't. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's the Alien 3 thing, isn't it? Oh, it's the hysteria of a woman. It's not,
Yeah, oh,
it's not a
yes.
monster that's going around killing people. It's like, wow, okie dokes. Okie dokie. But yeah, I mean, you've also got that wonderful thing, which again is very Dennis Wheatley, very Wickerman, and very M.R. James of like very postmodern people who are only concerned about very superficial things. They're concerned about doing a job, about their career, trespassing on something much more profound.
That's how it would go, though. I
Yeah,
mean, in most stories, you don't have like a hero
no,
in real life. Something bad's happened, so here's the superhero to come and
right,
unless it
right.
is a superhero story, most people or a detective story where
hmm
the guy that you're following is the detective.
Right.
Most stories, the person that in horror stories in particular, the person that happens upon these events is
Mm.
just some
They're
dude or
just
some
some,
girl. It's
yeah.
not, you
And
know.
and these characters really are, aren't they? They're very normal. There's something
Yeah,
very, 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 very normal about them. And that adds to the fear somehow, because of course, A, it's more identifiable than having sort of like a superhero kind of character. So you can sort of place yourself in that position. And B, it just makes them more believable,
yeah, I
you know?
think so.
It really does. And when really normal people start to find themselves in these very extreme situations where there actually is something weirdly metaphysical happening, that is kind of scary. That is, especially the fact that you don't really explain what's going on here. You kind of get an impression of it,
Yeah,
you
that
know?
was deliberate. It was
Yeah.
difficult to know how far to go with that.
Yeah.
That is the kind of thing I've because I think, did you beta read this story for me, Rebecca? Was this one of the ones that I sent
Yes.
you before? Yeah. Because I remember speaking about like how much to lay this out,
Hmm.
with regards to an explanation of what's happening,
Yeah,
and because I don't like in films where people just happen to come across the information that they need.
yeah.
Like in Cloverfield, for instance,
Hmm.
if they just happened to come across a file when they were running through the army tent that explained
Yeah,
what this monster was or something, it'd just be oh so convenient and
right.
explained to the audience, but it would have just ruined it. So I thought, unless one of the villagers happens to just lay it all out on the table for him, then the chances of him ever finding out are pretty slim.
Yeah,
So it's better that they don't, really.
absolutely. I mean, the other thing, of course, is if you've got a character that just starts expostulating to the audience,
Yes.
oh, this is what's happening, and it's like, I hate that. I hate that so
Yeah.
much. And you avoid that here. You don't really know. There are implications of what's happening, and that's it. I also love the fact that, again, this is a story that really does spiral into like real madness.
Yes.
But it's a collective madness. This one, it's a cultural madness, and that is really frightening.
Well, that kind of madness of the crowd thing is
Yeah.
always scary for me. That thought, and again, as someone who is autistic in a world full of people who
Mm.
mostly aren't, that feeling of everyone else is in on something and I'm not
Mm.
is quite common to me.
Yeah.
So to get that kind of feeling in a horror story with the Wicker Man style,
Mm.
everyone's in on something and I'm not in on it, is something I can relate to. So it works well to put it into a horror story. I can
Yeah.
relate to that a lot.
Definitely. And I mean, it's also one of the stories that gets really gruesome.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, it does a bit. Yeah,
like towards the end, it switches, doesn't it? The sedate nature of the earlier stages just flips on its head, and you get like carnage.
yes,
You get absolute carnage, and there's some really good body horror in this one.
yeah. It's. I just wanted it to be like a slow build, and then suddenly it's like, and we're off, go, and
Yeah,
then you get to that point where because there is a bit of a time lapse because
yeah,
the characters, it's the end of the day, they've
hmm,
been seeing things build up, and it's getting a bit weirder. Then they go to bed, get up in the middle of the night, and it's full on now.
yeah, yeah,
It's almost like if there's a riot building in the city that you're in because of whatever,
hmm,
and it's just there's a few crowds starting to gather in places, but it's
mm,
kind of tepid when you go to bed, and then you get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and everything's on
yeah,
fire and there's broken windows and the police are here with riot water cannons
right,
and you're like, Christ, it's escalated in the time I've been asleep, and
yeah,
and it's like that, and I think that jump of having them go to bed partway through it because why wouldn't you?
right, right.
That was quite a good way to jump to the extremity of it.
Yeah,
I
that
felt.
really works. It really does work. It's a nice sort of like flip, you know?
Yes,
It is
yeah.
it is literally like the flip from night to day. It just goes whoomp.
Is
Really,
there
really, yeah.
anything about that one that you wanted to point out, Rebecca? That we're just talking of you here.
Sorry, I do apologize.
Just really what you guys were saying, but I think the fact, like you say, with that flip when they go to bed and everything, you needed that because you would have otherwise had to put so much more in
Mm,
there about what was happening now and what was going to
Yeah,
happen next.
yeah,
Otherwise, it'd just be something that just randomly happened for no reason in the middle of the story.
right.
yeah.
So I think that and the way that you've built the pace up actually makes that story just as much as what's going on.
He just kind of let you pave over the cracks a little bit
Hmm.
in instead of just having, because they also have that point of how many weird things have to happen before these
Right.
people leave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before they start realizing that something really wrong is happening. Because
Yeah,
that is often a problem with this kind of story, isn't it?
yeah,
That you start asking yourself, well, why don't they just go?
yes.
What?
I think you ask that a lot with these kind of horror films, don't you?
Yeah.
I've had complaints from Rebecca watching things before where she said to me, "Why are these people not just gone home?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's actually a problem for horror in general, isn't it? Like, very often you need to contrive a reason why they are not leaving the dangerous or scary situation.
It works on the Wicker Man because he's a detective and he's there for a
Right.
job.
And also, he's on an
So
island. He
yeah,
can't get off of
yeah,
it. So it's like,
can't just
well,
go. No.
I mean, that's a very clever way of doing it, actually, like geographically. So
Yes.
they can't get away. Oh, fine. They do it in a lot of horror films with ghosts. One of the ways that a lot of more recent horror films have done it is they've made the person haunted rather than the house.
So it follows them.
So it
Yeah.
follows them. So you
Yeah.
literally can't get away from it. That's another clever way of doing it. But there has to be something. Why are they not leaving the situation? And here, it's very simple and very elegant. They just don't have any reason.
No, the things that they've seen are like, that's a little bit weird, isn't it? But then you carry on because, again, you have to remember that these characters think they are in the real world. They
Right.
don't know they're in a horror story. So if you imagine you went out tomorrow with your husband, Rebecca, and you go out and you visit some nice little village somewhere, and you have a nice little tea and cake shop, and there's a little second-hand bookshop and stuff, and then there's a weird maypole thing with a dead chicken stuck to it. You look at it and you think, that's a bit weird. It must be some part of some weird tradition they have here. But you're not going to jump in your car and go home.
Right.
No,
You
that's
know?
the type of thing that I'd be stood there taking pictures of. to be fair.
Yeah.
I'd be there taking pictures of all the cult behaviour until I was
Yeah.
strapped to something.
You'd be intrigued. Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, that's what I like about this one, because it's understandable why they've stayed.
Yeah.
And like you've said with The Wicker Man as well, it's understandable that he stayed. But if you rewatch that film enough times, you realise how many chances he had, how many
Yes.
people told him what was going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And interestingly, I mean, that's
but like with
it's
this, nobody actually does that.
no, and it's in a way it's part of the psychology of these kinds of stories, isn't it? That the horror comes when you realise how many chances they had to leave and didn't. I mean,
Yeah.
that's certainly the case with The Wicker Man. I mean, all of the horror in The Wicker Man comes at once. It comes at that point when they drag him over the hill.
Yeah.
And you see The Wicker Man, and you know
Yeah,
that
it's
they're
too
gonna.
late now.
It's too
Yeah.
late, and he's had all these chances to get away. He's had all these chances. There's like a horror mingled with regret here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the same thing here, you know. There is the point where they're driving the van and they decide to try and help the priest, I think it is, isn't it?
Yes.
And that is such a bad decision.
It is, but you would though. I don't think you could just ignore that.
Absolutely. It's such a human thing to do. It's the thing that most people, I think, would do. But of course, from the reader's perspective, when you look back on it, part of the horror is that, you could have gotten away.
Yeah, if you hadn't done this one thing, then
if you hadn't stopped, you could have gotten away, you know. And then, you know, the fact that you throw in this really abstruse, strange metaphysical element is very cool as well. This thing that's something from the outer dark.
Yeah.
An old power.
Yeah. There's a lot of that in England as well. That's something else that's England itself such a great story for a great setting for stories, is the fact that before people had even heard the name Jesus, we had all sorts of stuff.
Oh my God!
Before, you know,
going right back to like the mythologies of Luce Silverhand and Carnoon and all of the old gods that used to pervade this island.
Yeah, and the idea that perhaps one of them might have been a legitimate thing. I like that idea. It's something that's always stuck with me.
I love that idea. I do like that notion that maybe the old powers are still there in some way, shape, or form, just lingering, waiting for their time to come round again.
Yeah, exactly that. It's a very strong influence on my stuff, that.
Well, it's something you see all over the UK in terms of our like ornamentation and architecture. A lot of houses have got green men statues.
I have in the garden, and you see all sorts of, you see that in places like you wouldn't expect to see it. You know, like a very church-heavy town that's like all centered around its old church, and then all the houses have got pre-Christian stuff on them.
Right. Well, I mean, it comes from the fact that when the Christians came here, a lot of the traditions they kind of absorbed.
Yeah.
You know, it was a way of assimilating the local populations without causing too much tension.
Yeah, like Christmas is a classic example of that. Look, at the end of the day, people just want a big family get together and trading presents and having a sing and a dance on the 25th of December.
Right.
They say it's for this reason. If we say, would you mind saying that it's because of Jesus? You'll find that most people don't give a crap. They
Most
just want
people
the
don't
celebration.
care. Exactly.
So,
It's what the Romans did,
yeah,
when they went to all the, the various different subcults, when Charlemagne decided, well, we're going to cohere the empire under the auspices of this new religion, of Christianity. They basically went to many of the cults and subcults, of which there were many, and said, look, you can keep everything. You can
yeah,
keep all your celebrations, all your imagery. All you need to do is change a few names here and there.
yeah.
So it's not Mithrasmus anymore. It's Christmas now.
Yeah,
So, oh,
and that's
okay.
it. And people, fine, yeah. Well, can we still get drunk and have presents?
Right.
Yeah, fine then, whatever.
For the
Yeah.
most part, most of the cults were quite accommodating by all accounts.
Yeah.
Didn't stop them like killing a lot of them, but
No, but yeah.
But no, I mean you are right. This is kind of what these stories. It's folk horror, isn't it? It's what folk horror, certainly in the UK and from across a lot of Europe actually. It's what it recalls, isn't it? It's what it relies upon. This
Yeah.
notion that there are old ways that are much bloodier, much darker, but they may have something behind them.
Yes. Well, that's not even false. Even if you take the spiritual element out of it, England's got some horrific stuff. I mean, the
Oh my
fact that,
God.
like, people used to go and watch someone getting hung, drawn, and quartered as a family entertainment and
Yep.
things like that. You
Yeah.
see all these medieval torture devices where it's like, let's hold this guy between two horses and sew him in half for
Right.
a laugh.
Well,
I just think,
it's
it's,
absolutely true. Going right back into the days of the Druids, in the earliest iterations of their faith, they actually did practice human sacrifice. They actually did,
yeah,
like, slit the throats of virgins and pour it into the soil to ensure a harvest and whatnot. That became symbolic later on, and they used to like chop the tops off of wine casks, and it became
yes,
symbolic. But that wasn't always the case.
no. No, there is a darkness in the history of not just England but anywhere that's been around long enough
Any
that
human
yeah,
civilization you can think of,
yeah,
basically.
yeah,
Going right back to the very earliest,
yeah,
the ziggurat cities across the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates, they used to practice human sacrifice like buggery. You wouldn't believe. You wouldn't believe.
yeah. Well, just this idea that, like, I mean, it's good, but this idea that we have that, you know, brutally murdering someone in some horrific way that takes hours
Mm.
is a bad thing. It is relatively new in the terms of human history.
Historically, yes, it is. Historically, yes, it is. In the same way that the notion that there should be periods when we're not massacring one another
Yeah, yeah,
pointlessly is kind of a new concept.
yes, it is. Yeah, yeah, it is.
Historically
Absolutely.
speaking, it's kind of a new concept. Or that we shouldn't be torturing people who are just like a little different to
Yeah.
to scare people into
Yeah,
conforming.
it is. It is a really relative. It's like we've been playing a football game for like 80 minutes, and in the last 10 minutes, someone said you're not allowed to do that anymore.
Oh
But for the
yeah.
majority of the match, that's exactly what we were all doing.
The roots of tradition and of civilization are bloody. It's
Yeah,
it's bodies, it's torture, it's war, it's slavery, it's genocide. That is the absolute truth. Um, and what stories like this kind of remind us of is that bloody past.
yeah,
It scares us because we fear a slip back.
yeah. Well, I'm surprised that one was your favourite. I didn't know which I
Yeah,
thought would be your favourite, but that's nice to
yeah,
hear because
I liked that one.
I enjoyed writing it.
Yeah, I liked that one a lot. I think it's because it reminded me, it echoed, it echoed. First of all, it's a mythological story. It's kind of a folkloric story, and I like that anyway. It's got that element of the Wicker Man and of Dennis Wheatley, which again is something I really enjoy. But I also like the post-modernity. I think the placing of it helped. The fact that it is after the Hangman's Sojourn.
Yeah.
That really, really, really helped. Because you've got two very dark stories in quick succession. You've got the Wreaths of Wellbridge and Night Train. Night Train is a really
Mm.
bloody dark story as well, but in a different way.
That one was originally written for an anthology that never came to pass.
Ah.
which was an anthology that was based on the titles, if not necessarily the content, but the titles of Guns N' Roses songs.
Got you. Right. Okay. Interesting.
So I picked Night Train and I looked into what the lyrics were about and everything, and kind of crafted a story based on that. But then that
Right.
anthology never, as is often the case in our industry, that anthology never came to pass.
Never transpired. Does
But I
happen.
still quite liked this story. And it also has something that's still unusual in British horror fiction, which is that it's set in a working class council estate.
Right. That is exactly what drew me to it. It's the fact that it's like this. Again, it's kind of Ramsey Campbell. It's dirty. It's grimy. It's working class. It's a council estate. You know.
Yeah,
It's not a gothic mansion. It's not upper or middle class. It's working class. Working class horror is still rare.
it is. It really is. I can't think of many at all.
Why though?
I don't know.
Why
I
is it
don't
so
know.
rare? Is it? I mean, because there are so many working class writers now.
Yeah, yeah.
There are so many of us knocking about. I don't understand why there aren't more people talking about the experience of the working class in these terms, because there's just a wealth. There's just a wealth. I mean, you know what I loved about this story more than anything? It's the fact that the metaphysical stuff, when it starts to happen, is kind of less horrific than the life that the protagonist is living.
Yes,
And
I think that's very true. Yeah.
for me, that kind of working class horror that draws that parallel, I think is fantastic. I love that. That says, like, you know what? This stuff, which is ostensibly horrific, actually has this patina of the fantastical about it. And the miraculous. It suggests a metaphysics that's beyond the waking. And a lot of the time, the waking now is awful.
Yeah. Yeah, well, this is another one of those stories where, I mean, I should just say it was written as based on that Guns N' Roses song, but then upon re-evaluating it and just tweaking it slightly, I don't think it's obvious that that's what it's. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
I think it stands alone as its own
Oh,
thing,
yeah,
and it's not
definitely.
obvious that it's not like it's word for word based on that story or anything.
No.
But something with this story that I deliberately did is that you never really get any kind of an explanation as
No.
for the stuff that goes on in it.
No, and again, it's something I kind of love. I know there are
Yeah.
readers out there that don't. I know I've had plenty of my fair share of feedback on my own stories about this. The fact that there are readers who don't like ambiguity. It's as
Where
simple
do
as
you
that.
stand on that, Rebecca? Do you like to get explanations for things, or a bit of both, or left, or?
Yeah, a bit of both. It depends really what it is. Certain things just don't need it.
Right.
Some things are just better left to, okay, well, I don't know what that was.
Yeah.
There's such a thing as explaining things too much.
Absolutely.
And it's something that people make a big mistake in film on with this,
all the
because
time.
everything has got a prequel, and then that prequel's got a prequel. It's like, I don't need to know.
I don't need to know.
Really don't care.
Right.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was that I saw that was coming out, but it was a prequel to something that's already been explained anyway. It's going to really bug me now because I don't know what it was. But basically, the last film about this had a section that explained that character.
Right.
And
So
then
there's
I
no
heard,
need for a full film of them.
yeah, we're getting a prequel to this. It's like, why? Everything about this character has just been explained in this film. There is no further you can take that.
Right. And
Yeah.
also, I
So
mean,
you've got 5 minutes of material.
right. And a lot of the time, if a character or if a situation isn't explained, that's deliberate. It's that's the source of like the horror, the unknown. So when you've got like these, I get really nasty about this, but like these know nothing, like executives and whatnot around board tables deciding, oh, the space here for a franchise or the space for a prequel or whatnot. I'm like, oh my god. But the big one for me was the Halloween films.
Yeah.
You don't need a background for Michael Myers. I don't
No,
want
it
to know.
defeats the point. It defeats the point.
I
Yeah.
don't want to
Yeah.
know. It actually dilutes that character. Another really good example is Hannibal Lecter. Like
Yes.
the way the books, like in the book, I really loathed the book Hannibal. I hated it so much because it motivates him.
Right.
It gives you an explanation for why he eats people, and it's really boring, it's really narrow, it's very Freudian, and it basically undermines him. It undermines him as a character, and I'm sort of like, why did you do that?
Yeah.
Why did you do that? You've just
Well, I think
undercut.
the way they get around that with another serial killer character with the Joker
Hmm.
is that in Batman, whenever you get an origin for him,
Hmm.
it's immediately followed by the fact that that might be a load of bollocks. It
Exactly.
might
I
it
mean,
might not actually be true.
it's not a universal thing. There's freight in certain characters and certain concepts where you can get away with it, and the Joker is a really good example because there's so many ideas tied up in that character that you can explore those ideas through him. So when you
Yeah.
do get an origin, I mean, it's not even I would posit it's not even an origin story like Joker. It's
Mm.
not even an origin story, not really. I think the
No.
people who bemoan that film because there's no way that character could become like the Heath Ledger Joker. Well, yeah, that's true. That's the point,
Yeah.
That's the point. They're using the archetype to explore ideas that are outside the core mythology. That can be done. And in fact, using an example that we've already talked about, the series of Hannibal
Yeah.
kind of incorporates that material from Thomas Harris's books, but does it in such a way whereby it doesn't undermine the character. It's really clever.
That's important. Yeah.
Yeah,
If
really
you can
clever.
take an element that was previously a bit crap but
Right.
make it a bit
Well,
better.
the way they do it, whereas in the book, it explicitly states the reason Hannibal eats people is because of this.
Yes.
In the series, they explicitly state there's no way that this could be why.
Ah, that's
This
clever.
is
Subverting it then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they deliberately take it and subvert it because they want him to remain like semi-demonic. They want him to remain almost mythological,
Yeah, like Mike Myers.
like Mike
He's
Myers.
seemingly human, but then he might not be. But you don't need
Exactly.
an answer to that. Yeah,
I don't need to know because, in fact, like the ending of the film discusses this. You've got Laurie Strode saying, looking down at where Michael Myers fell, and he's gone. He's
yeah,
bafflingly gone. And she says it was the boogeyman, wasn't it? And Sam Loomis says, yeah, it was.
yeah,
It's like, yeah, it kind of was.
yeah.
I love that ambiguity. Is he just a maniac? Is he something else?
Like, that child could have been the repository for some sort of evil primordial
Right,
force that just takes somebody once a generation.
right.
But you don't need to explicitly
No,
go into that and show it and
don't
explain it.
want to know. Don't want to know. The Blair Witch film
Yeah,
does it beautifully, beautifully,
yeah,
where you just don't know. You just don't know. It's so scary because it's like, what is it?
yeah,
What
yeah.
is it? What's going on? Is there a mundane reason? Is it just people fucking about, or is there something else?
Yes, absolutely.
Don't
Yeah,
want to know. Don't want any answers for that. you know. But a lot of horror franchises, unfortunately, do make that mistake of giving far too much and just explaining, and it just doesn't work. I mean, one of the, just drawing it back to Whistling Past the Graveyard, Acheron.
yes,
Acheron.
Mm.
First of all, I loved the name, and
yeah.
again, you've got this situation where there's not really an explanation.
No,
There's a suggestion of one at one point,
yeah,
but that may not be the case. That's what I love about this one. It's sort of metaphysical, but also sort of psychological and sort of mythological at the same time. I mean, have you guys ever seen a YouTube series called No Through Road?
I think I
no.
have.
No Through Road is it's kind of it's not, I'd say it's more infamous than famous. It's part of like the Slender Man mythos, and it's a series of very short films by just British guys. There's no like money behind it or anything, but it's very similar to this concept, Lex, where you've got like um a road that loops endlessly
Yeah,
and people don't know why it's happening and they can't escape from it. It's the kind of thing that it's the kind of archetype where people will recognize because it's something that exists in our subconscious. It's like a nightmare.
yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
Mm.
Yeah,
Where sometimes in nightmares the same path does loop endlessly, and you're desperately trying to get off it, but nothing you do will enable you to do it.
Yes.
It's kind of a clever thing for horror writers to do, to sort of tap into that.
Yeah, it's like a very unusual form of feeling trapped in it,
Yeah.
because it's not like you're trapped in a room. You just you get every option that should be available to get out isn't for
It
some reason.
it reduces you to the state of a child
Yeah.
because all the power's gone. All the
Yes.
agency that you thought you had is gone, and it's not something you can apprehend. It's not like, oh well, this is happening to me, so all I have to do is this, and I'll be fine.
Sure. Yeah, a few people said to me that they feel like that story is sort of reminiscent of like an early series sort of Twilight Zone
Yeah,
episode.
very
And
much so.
I didn't consider that when I wrote it, but now when I think about it now, I do kind of picture it in black and white.
Yeah.
It kind of fits.
I can see that. I can see that. I mean, it's like it's there is Twilight Zone. There's sort of like Tales of the Unexpected. There's that
Yeah.
feeling about it. But yeah, I liked that one a lot. Acheron. Again, also the mythological reference, which is very cool. That's always
Thank
going
you.
to get me. That's
Yeah.
always going to get me, the mythological stuff.
I liked that one for the same reasons. I think anything that taps into that nightmare mode
Yeah.
is really good in horror, because it is just that feeling. It's just like being trapped in a wide open space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where there's
And
something acting on you that you don't,
Yeah.
you can't even see.
Yeah, exactly.
It is kind of terrifying. There's like this creeping horror in it where you start to, as the reader, you start to revert. You start to like go back to your childhood and remember situations where you slipped your parents' hand or something.
Yeah. Like getting lost in a supermarket and there's feasibly only like 8 aisles, and yet it's somehow impossible to find your mum at that point.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that feeling. I love horror story, any kind of horror media that can evoke that feeling. I'm kind of in, I'm kind of there.
Yeah.
If they ever like filmed this one, I can see it being like a found footage kind of thing,
Yeah, it would have to be done in a very low rent sort of way.
Yeah, definitely.
I wouldn't want it to be big. I mean, there's nothing in it that really needs big CGI stuff, but I think it would be much better done as a very low key sort of filmed on film to give it that slightly grainy look to it and that kind of thing.
It's amazing the amount of horror that does benefit from that, really, isn't it? I mean,
I agree. Yeah.
You can count the number of really successful, and I mean like successful in the abstract sense, horror films that have massive budgets on the fingers of one hand. That it generally tends to kill horror for some reason. I don't know why.
I think it's because it's very, very obvious that something's not real. Like even if CGI is the best CGI in the world, it's not real.
Right.
Whereas when it's a guy with some prosthetics on, who you're mostly hidden away from you by the darkness to hide the fact that his costume's not very good.
Right, that it's not great. Yeah.
That actually makes it more real because he's physically stood there.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And he is real,
I feel like as well you get a truer performance from the actors around them when you're using something like that, because it's got to be difficult to act with like either somebody in a bright blue suit covered in tennis balls or just nothing there at all.
Yeah.
And make it seem real. But some of these things are probably quite unnerving to look at anyway.
Yeah.
Kane Hodder's book, for example, from when he was playing Jason in Friday 13th, he actually would go and sit out all fully dressed in his stuff because he would be just in between scenes. And the local kids had sort of come up thinking he was like a rag doll or something like that, and he'd get up and scare him half to death because of how he looked. And it's just things like that. If you're in the moment doing a scene and you've got that in front of you, I think you probably react to it a hell of a lot better. So it gives the whole film a better thing when you've got physical effects like that.
It does, but I think as a viewer as well, your mind just knows that something's not there.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's definitely true. I mean, even for like the actors who are in these prosthetics, I mean, there's an interview with Doug Bradley on the Hellraiser DVD set where he talks about, because he couldn't obviously get out of the makeup once he was in it,
No.
well, until they
Yeah.
finished filming. So he talks about like going into the canteen dressed as Pinhead, essentially, and nobody would sit with him. Like he said,
Oh,
it had this incredible isolating effect, which
yeah.
was brilliant
Yeah.
for the character.
Yeah, I bet it
He
was.
um
Yeah.
he talked about that in his book as well, Behind the Mask of the Horror Actor.
Hmm.
And he goes into all different actors and stuff in that. That's what spurred me on to look at some of the older actors actually and look into them a little bit more. But he talked about his experience in that. It was very much the same sort of stuff he's probably said in that interview.
Uh-huh. It's
So,
fascinating, isn't it? It is fascinating. I mean, like
mm,
there is a tendency for low budget to sort of inform invention. So they know they haven't got the
Yeah,
money. They know they haven't got the
absolutely.
money, and also they know they haven't got many chances to get it right.
mm,
Yes.
So they've got to be ingenious,
I
you
think
know?
putting that kind of box around your creativity somehow unleashes it.
Yeah, I
You
think
know,
so.
like saying you've only got X amount to work with, as
Hmm.
opposed to you can have whatever you want. I actually think that makes you get more creative with it
Yeah, I think
because
so.
you've got limitations to operate within. So you're like, okay, how can we feasibly do this on this
Yeah.
budget? How
yeah,
and it leads to those restrictions can actually lead to better than if you have that unlimited option of budget and everything.
Well, they can't rely on spectacle, can they? They can't rely on
No.
spectacle, so they've got to have atmosphere. They've got to rely on
So the,
something
the
else.
characters actually have to matter,
Hmm.
and it's not the characters aren't just one dimensional fodder waiting for the big CGI monster to come out of
Hmm.
the sea. The character into it. You're only going to see the monster for 10 minutes because the prosthetics are that bad that you don't want them on camera for that long. So
Right.
you've got most of the film is going to focus on the characters, which thereby makes it a much better film.
Yeah, I mean,
But if you had the
yeah,
unlimited budget, you wouldn't get that.
just look at all like the really low rent horror films that came out of the mid to late 1970s. The directors of which went on to become gangbusters. People like
Yeah,
Wes
yeah,
Craven and John Carpenter and whatnot. So look at stuff like Last House on the Left, the original Last House on the Left,
yes,
which is a complete Vietnam film. There's no budget at all. It's like 50p and half a curly whirly. There's
yeah,
no budget in that film whatsoever. So it's just atmosphere. The whole thing, it
yes,
relies upon absolute distress,
yeah.
which is an amazing
Absolutely.
thing. It's an
But it
amazing
wouldn't
thing.
if they'd chucked all the money in the world at him, he might not have done that.
Well,
He
that
might have just yeah.
what happens is when it's too expensive, that guerrilla style of filmmaking goes away. You
Yeah.
suddenly get like really well framed, really composed and contrived shots. So that sense of it being almost like newsreel footage or being
It stops it feeling real, doesn't it?
right, it goes away somehow. The
It
Texas
becomes
Chainsaw
too
Massacre,
smooth and too crisp and
Right.
yeah.
The Texas
Yeah.
Chainsaw Massacre is
mm,
another one. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
no budget at all. Like
A lot of
zero
that
budget.
feels like someone running about with a camera, doesn't it?
Right.
It's not meant to be a found footage thing, but sometimes the camera's so shaky and badly
Right.
framed and stuff that it could be.
It's got like a kinetic quality to it. It makes you feel like
Yeah,
you're
that's the
running,
word.
doesn't it?
Yes,
Like
yes,
you're
yes, he
running,
does.
or
Yeah,
it puts you more in the scene somehow.
yeah,
Um, and I generally, I mean, I'm not a universalist. I don't deny the possibility of good big budget horror because they do exist. Things like The Shining and whatnot.
yeah,
Beautiful stuff. But for the most part, I do like low rent horror.
yeah.
I think it's often where all the invention happens.
Oh yeah, yeah. Necessity creates that.
Absolutely.
If you have to have limitations on you, then you find ways to do what you're wanting to do within these limitations.
Yeah, totally. And it's often what drives the creativity of the genre.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, even some of the bigger budget films were not that big budget because horror never tends to get like the same budget that action
No,
films gets.
no.
Um, I mean, even like stuff like Hellraiser. Hellraiser started as an indie project.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it was an indie project. It was originally funded by like the British Arts Council. Um, And even when it was when it, New Line got involved and actually gave it some money, it was still only like it's an obscenely small amount compared to not only how films are made now, but how films of the era were made. It's something like £90,000 they made it for, like ridiculously low money,
Yeah, yeah.
given what it
But I mean,
recouped.
the effects in that, again, probably because they're practical, but they still look really good.
I love the effects in the original Hellraiser. I think the rebirth of Frank
Yeah, it's
is
fantastic. Yeah.
phenomenal. It's so fleshy, it's so lymphy, it's so wet and kind of organic. It
Yeah.
looks horribly real. Like
But that's
horribly
because he's
real.
there. There
Yeah.
is actually a bloke wearing this suit covered in
hmm
fake blood,
Yeah.
with bits of flesh stuck on it.
Yep.
That is always going to look better than if they just CGI'd it.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
It ages a lot better as well.
Oh my God, doesn't it? Doesn't it just? When you look at bad CG.
Bad CG age. Funnily enough, I was talking with my partner Charlie about this the other day because I've been watching the original Star Trek series for the first time
Ah,
in my life, and Charlie is a prosthetic makeup artist, so
right.
she's a big fan of she's worked with the people who do Doctor Who, she's worked with the Harry Potter guys, and she's big into practical effects. She loves that stuff, and so I always talk to her about that stuff when I'm watching it in a film or something, and. What I was saying about Star Trek is that the stuff that looks really, really janky is whenever they try and do a computer effect.
Yeah.
Like when they've got a big floating entity or the laser beams or that kind of thing. Whereas the guys who are aliens wearing a prosthetic face piece or something, they still look all right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the suits are a bit very much of the era, like they're all bright silver and that kind of thing. But in
Yeah.
terms of the actual faces, like one of the very first episodes has these aliens on it that have got these giant brain heads and they've got veins around it, and you can see the veins pulsing.
Yeah.
And that looks great. That looks really good. Even now, like 60 years later, that looks really good. But then 3 episodes later, you've got this giant green floating hand, and that just looks bollocks.
Yeah.
But it's always the practical stuff that ages so much better.
There is a film from, I believe, the mid 90s that's currently on the iPlayer called The Relic. Have you seen this one?
Oh, I remember that being
Yeah.
good, but I bet it hasn't held up
It
well.
has not aged well. I remember going to the cinema to see that, and it's one of the early examples of a CG monster in a horror film.
It was a good monster, though, that. I remember it being quite unique.
But it's well designed. Like, the look of the monster's cool, but the CG is woof. Ouch.
Yeah.
It really hurts. It looks good when you get the close-ups and it's a practical effect. When it's like a puppet or a machine,
Yeah, I was going to say there's a couple of bits where it is a practical thing,
Yeah,
isn't there? Because I
the
remember people
close-ups.
physically interacting with it.
Yeah, whenever you get a close-up, it's like a machine, It's a rig of some description. But the CG shots of the whole creature, ouch. Oh,
Okay.
wow. Wow, has that aged badly. I mean, CG in horror is problematic anyway.
Do you remember that era in the early 2000s where they did CG blood?
Oh, stop
What was
it.
that?
Why? Why? How much
I would
money?
honestly rather see stage blood.
Right. How
Did they
easy?
have like a bunch of precious actors who wouldn't let it get themselves get dirty or
I mean,
something?
like, how easy is it to simulate blood with just like
not hard,
corn
is it?
syrup or something?
It's really not difficult.
so
I could do
cheap.
it with stuff in my cupboards. It's
Right.
not. Yeah.
But yeah, it's awful. I mean, did you ever see the adaptation of the Midnight Meat Train, the Clive Barker story?
No, I've not seen that one.
Terrible.
I don't think I have.
The short story is amazing. The short stories are fantastic, but the film is atrocious.
That's not the one with Vinnie Jones on it.
It is the one with Vinnie Jones.
I knew it was on
yes.
something to do with a train.
It
Yeah.
is the one with Vinnie Jones, yeah. Sadly, he's really well cast. In that particular role, he's really well cast. It just so happens that the film is crap. How you take a short story that's called The Midnight Meat Train, that's just like full of action-packed butchery and gore, but also has incredible atmosphere and wonderful sort of dark metaphysics, and make it boring. I just,
Yeah, that's a challenge, isn't it?
but the CG blood in that, oh my god, woof.
I just never understood it because it's not something like, oh, we've always wanted to be able to do a giant monster, but it always looked crap. But now we've got the technology to do it. I can
Right.
understand CG. I can understand the impetus for CGI there.
Absolutely.
But blood, you've been able to do that forever. So why suddenly start
Right.
using a computer for it?
Right. You've been able to do it cheaply and effectively, like since the earliest days of cinema.
Yeah.
So why complexify it? It just doesn't make any sense. And it
No.
always looks fake. It always looks weightless. And in horror films, that for some reason in this film, in the Midnight Meat Train, they clearly wanted to show off the CG blood for some reason. So
there's a lot of it.
there's a lot of it, and they do this directorial thing where whenever the blood occurs, they slow everything down and they linger over these droplets of blood that are streaming in the air, and it looks like an anime film. It's like that's not the right atmosphere.
No, not at all.
Doesn't work.
Yeah.
You know?
It should very much be reserved for things that you can't physically do.
Absolutely.
I mean, to be honest, like blood, for example, you can do in one of two ways. You can have the realistic corn syrup, dark blood that looks like real blood, or you can have stage blood, which just looks like paint.
Yeah.
But it still looks so much better than CGI.
Yeah, it does. It's still better.
It so does.
I think CGI is best when it's used in enhancing the physical.
Totally.
So have you watched The Mandalorian yet, George?
I haven't yet, no. I will go and watch it at some point.
Rebecca's just watched it, I believe.
I have, yes.
Yes. So
I binged
it. What they do there is this. It's genuinely they have invented a new way of filming these productions, which is going to be taken forward for other films, I suspect, where what they do is they don't have a green screen.
Right.
They have these massive, like, projector screens, HD 4K, sharp as it's possible to get, surrounding the actors, right?
Right.
So let's say they're in a forest. The set in front of them is actual trees, well, fake trees, but you know what I mean, with actual forest floor and actual weather machines. So they're stood in like a 50-foot by 50-foot fake forest, and then these screens project the rest of it.
Right.
So the actors look around and see a 5,000-foot forest.
Wow.
But then there's only like 50 real trees, the rest of it is an image, and then that is filmed. So it's like CG, except the actors see it there and then.
Oh, that's so cool.
So they interact with it better. So there's other bits like where one of them stood on the top of a spaceship. The bit of the spaceship he stood on is the very front of, let's say, the Star Destroyer, and that is real, and they've made that, and it's about 200 foot long, and he stood on it. But then the camera, the screens show you the other 3,000 feet of it. So he's standing there, and he turns around, and he looks like he stood on.
Oh, wow.
You know?
That's so cool.
I like that.
That it's all on there's a behind the scenes thing that you can watch on Disney Plus with The Mandalorian. If you've watched it, Rebecca, you should watch them because it shows you him doing it. And it's fascinating because it's like half and half.
Right.
And that is brilliant because the actors don't have to pretend they can see what's happening. It's there.
So that's like,
so they can react to it better.
You're right. That's like good. A new way of filming.
It is. They genuinely invented it for this.
Brilliant. Wow.
Jon Favreau's idea, who's the guy behind all of it, and he's also Happy Hogan in the Marvel films.
Right. That's amazing. I mean, that is that's like a new thing. That's revolutionary.
It is. But I also like how they use it to touch things up as well. So, like, if you ever see, let's say, Iron Man, right, in the Marvel movies, if you look at behind-the-scenes set production photos and film of Robert Downey Jr. wearing that suit, because it is a real suit, it looks plastic.
Yes.
But what they do on the film is they use CGI to add a layer over it, if you like a touching it up so it looks heavy and it looks metal and it's got scuff marks on it and stuff. Or Captain America Shield, when you see Chris Evans holding that in real life, it's basically a big plastic thing. The CGI they add to it makes it look like a big metallic thing. So
Totally.
that kind of thing is brilliant because he physically is holding that shield,
Yeah.
but it doesn't look as good as it does on the screen. And that is the best way to use CGI because you've got the best of both worlds there.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree. So it just enhances things. Yeah.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
like it's something they did in the recent Dark Crystal series in on Netflix, yeah, where the whole thing is puppetry. Like the world, every element is puppetry, but they use CG just to enhance things like facial expressions and that kind of thing
Excellent.
to
Yeah.
make it more real, you know? And it works a treat. It works so well. It's beautiful. Absolutely
it's-
stunning.
That's what you want to do. Just use it to just file down the rough edges, if you like. That's all the things that are physically impossible to do otherwise. But
Yeah.
I think if you physically having that puppet there and then making it look better is better than just full on CGI in it.
I totally agree.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's-
Filter, not a crutch.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a great way of putting it. Actually, it's a rare situation where the entirely CG entity actually works. There's a few rare examples. Things like the Lord of the Rings films do it very well. But even then, the watchword was always on the practical.
Yeah, there's a hell of a lot of practical in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
It's only the stuff they physically couldn't do, like Balrog, for
Balrogs
instance.
and
Yeah.
dragons and things. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And even then, they mocked them up physically. You know, they did
Yeah.
as much physical as they possibly could.
Yeah. Well, in the Mandalorian, the Baby Yoda is actually a physical thing. That is an actual
it is
little
actually,
animatronic thing.
Yeah, a little puppet. Yeah.
It moves, it makes noises, it walks. It's and it's animatronic. But then they have guys doing the arms like Jim Henson Studio sort of thing.
Yeah. Oh, so cool.
So there's about 4 people operating it at any one time. So when the actors lean down and pick him up and stuff, they're really doing it.
I like that. I like that a lot.
You know, and it costs about $2 million, that thing.
Oh my God.
But John Favreau was like, we're not CGIing it.
Yeah.
We are doing this real, you know?
Yeah, sort of like, it's almost like a homage to how the originals were made in certain respects.
Well, when they made the most recent Star Wars film, Frank Oz wouldn't come back for Yoda unless they did him practical.
Oh, brilliance.
He was very clear on that. He said, you did him CGI in the prequels because he was jumping about and stuff, and that's fair enough, but I'm not doing him again unless he's actually a puppet. So.
Brilliant.
But yeah, so that was in the. But yeah, Grogu, the little Baby Yoda, is a real physical thing, and I think it works so much better for that.
I am going to have to say, because you're not the first person I've spoken to in podcasts recently who's insisted that I need to watch it.
Oh, it's so good.
I will.
Rebecca just finished it, didn't you?
I will sit down and have a look at. I mean, the other one we need to do, Lex, is Gravity Falls.
Yeah, Rebecca just watched that as well.
Oh, have you just watched that, Rebbie? Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, I binged that one as well.
It's so good.
I binged that one a bit faster.
Yeah, Gravity Falls is something
I
else.
really like that.
It's something else. I rewatched it just recently, actually. I rewatched it to sort of catch up, you know?
We do need to do one about that because there's so much to talk about with it.
It's
Rebecca's got the journal as well. I lent it her. She's reading it at the moment.
Yeah, it looks amazing.
It's so good. I'm glad though that I watched everything before I started reading it.
Oh yeah.
Because
there's so much to pick up on.
It would be interesting if you had never seen it. It would be interesting, but you wouldn't get the same level of interest from it.
It's slightly esoteric, isn't it? Like the stuff in there, it makes sense if you know what it's referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing that's annoying me at the moment is that there isn't the other 2 journals.
Yeah.
And he keeps saying, this is referenced in Journal 2. And I'm like, well, there isn't one, is
they
there?
haven't made them. They haven't made them.
Oh, that would be so cool if they did, though, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it will.
And also Grunkle Stan's fez. I want the fez.
I've got that.
Oh, you can get the fez. Oh my God.
I've got it. I'm looking at it now. Yeah.
Bill's top hat. Maybe.
Bill's top hat would be good as well. Yeah.
That would be cool. Anyway, guys, is there anything else, Lex, that you want to chat about regarding Whistling Through the Graveyard?
There's a story in it called The Castle, which is one of the only stories I've ever written which is actually set in my hometown. I don't usually do that.
Right.
It's not like a deliberate thing of, I'm never setting a story here, but it just never occurs to me really.
Right, it never came up, yeah?
No, but that story is setting the old Castle Market, which Rebecca will remember as well in Sheffield.
I do, yeah. That story gave me a real sense of nostalgia about
that. Well, it is one,
I used to go there with my grandma and stuff like that as a kid.
Same here, yeah.
Right.
It just, everything about that story, you can see it. You're there. You're walking around that place, and it really does. It's spot on.
So there's a really strong
when I was writing it, I found like old plans and like. It was a fire escape plan that I found because I wanted to describe it properly, not just from my half sort of memories from childhood. So when I'm saying the toilets are to the left and down there next to this, they actually are.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? I wanted to get all that accurate rather than just be sort of riffing on it. For that exact reason. So if anybody who is from the area or has been there will read it and know that it's correct,
they'll get it. There's like a locality to it.
It really, really has paid off in that story, to be honest. Like, I couldn't have told you where any of that stuff was if we were just talking about Castle Market, but when you're reading it, you can see it, you know that is where that was. No shadow of a doubt, that is where that was.
Yeah.
So it does tap into that nostalgic memory that you bury and you don't know anything about. Because if I was going to tell you something about Castle Market, it would simply be where the sweets were.
Yeah.
My defining memory is if you went too close to the left side of it, it all smelled of meat, because that was where you went down to the meat market bit. So it just kind of wafted up.
The main thing that I remember is that you had to walk through the fish market to get to the sweets.
You did, yeah.
Right. So there's
you definitely knew about that.
Yeah, there's a sensory element, isn't there?
Very much. I always think smell is a very strong association of memory.
Oh my god!
And somewhere like a market like that, where you've got the fresh meat and the fresh fish, that smell. As soon as you think about that place, it's that smell that comes back to you.
The evocation is really strong, isn't it? I mean, even the people who don't know the area will understand because they will have been somewhere.
Oh, of course,
that has the same feelings and the same associations. Anywhere where there's like a moderately small town or like a market town.
Yeah, it's kind of a universal thing, isn't it? If you've been to a fresh meat and produce and that sort of market, that is the smell. You all know it.
And there's just so many of places like that in the UK. You know, everyone has been to somewhere like that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's kind of nice to have a universal thing, but I did want to the mapping of the place itself and the myths that it talks about in that story are genuine local myths as well.
I was going to ask actually, is it like an actual thing? Is it something that people do talk about?
The ghost itself isn't. No one's ever made that claim that it's haunted. But the explanation behind the ghost, as in the historical, this once happened.
Yeah.
That is a real thing.
Right. That's something that people would actually like understand if you went and talked to them about it.
Yeah. I mean, so it's kind of, I've added the haunting element, but the historical events behind the haunting are real stuff.
I mean, I never realised until we were talking about it now, but actually, it does exemplify something else about the collection, and that is that it's very British, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like really British. That's not something that necessarily comes about just because you've got a British writer.
No, not at all. No.
There is like a roadmap going on here of not just British folklore and mythology, but like urban mythology as well.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, I think that's very clear.
Every town, in fact, not just towns, but even like locations within towns, like schools and neighborhoods, have these stories.
Yes, absolutely. You will always have them. Yeah.
They're pervasive on schoolyards, aren't they? They're pervasive. There was this kid who went to the local field where there used to be an insane asylum or something, and they saw this, and this happened to them. That is so pervasive.
I've got one near me where there's a steelworks, part of which is still there, and there's kind of like a pipe that goes from the steelworks. It's like an overflow pipe for the steam runoff that comes through to where the woods are and like into the river. And kids used to crawl through there. I mean, Grandma has talked about it when she was alive. Kids used to kind of dare each other to crawl through because you'd come up at the other side, and then the steelworker foreman would tell you off and that.
Yeah.
So it was like, I dare you to go in there. But there was a story amongst them that a girl had gone in there once and got stuck and died during an air raid, and that she was still in there and would grab at you halfway through the pipe.
That's cool. I like that one.
I have looked at that pipe as an adult and considered attempting it. The steelworks is shut down now, so you wouldn't come out in the middle of the steelworks, but you'd just come out in the middle of what used to be the steelworks.
Yeah.
But there's no way I could get through it. It'd be like cave, dragging your son through, and I can't be doing with that.
Yeah. But that is scary, isn't it? It's a scary concept. But yeah, that kind of story is everywhere across this island. Yeah.
I love them. I love the folk things like that.
Oh, me too. Love them to bits. Love them to bits.
Yeah.
Rebecca, was there any stories that you particularly liked or had any comment on, good or bad, that we haven't addressed?
Well, actually, my favourite of these was Partridge in a Pear Tree.
Oh, the Dickensian one.
Oh yeah. Christmas Ghost.
So I wondered what George thought of that one.
Oh yeah, what I loved about that one, first of all, I know Lex's penchant for Dickens. Obviously, we did like a whole kind of season, really, didn't we, Lex? We did like a whole Christmas, basically. And this is it, isn't it? This is in this collection. This is the Dickensian one.
Very much. It's written in his style as much as I could imitate it.
Like the style, the setting, the characters, so Dickensian. But then the imagery that you throw in, like, because it is so Dickensian, when the imagery goes almost surreal, it's really kind of like, whoa, it works. It works really well. The image that sticks in my mind and will probably always stick in my mind is that of the tree with the split and the human anatomy in it.
Yeah.
Loved it. Loved that. Loved it to bits.
Yeah, I think I like that idea when I come up with it, I must admit, because it's just so weird.
It's so horrible and strange. I mean, like, it's not just like Dickens, like, when it's just the guy, like, pottering around his apartments and, like, going slowly mad, there's, like, a curious case, the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde about it, almost, There's that feeling about it. But when it starts to get really strange, it's like, okay... Okay, I love that. Yeah,
I liked that. I like as well that the imagery, and this is very much a theme in Lex's work anyway, but the imagery, particularly in this one, does just smack you in the face. Like with the tree, and even just with the pear.
Yeah,
the pear itself is a very strong piece of imagery in that one.
Yeah, I think it's because, like, you are programmed to see it as a Dickensian story because of the style, so you're just not expecting it. Because Dickens doesn't really go to those places, even in his horror stories, So
no, he doesn't really. No.
It has this, like, I can describe it in terms of color. Like the color palette of the story is kind of the color palette of winter and of the interior of these apartments, so it's like grim, it's murky, and then you get red. You get these flashes of red, arterial, and it's like, whoa,
Yes. Yeah, I think that's fair. I would definitely imagine it, like, if it was filmed, you would imagine that the colours in everything else were kind of muted.
The spot
and sort
colour.
of drained back a bit, but then the blood is enhanced, so everything, the redness is... Yeah.
It would be, the red would have the effect of shocking. It would be so vivid in comparison to everything else that it would actually have the effect of jolting the audience,
Yes, very. Yeah, I think that would look great with it. Yeah, I really enjoyed writing that one. It was really fun to just sit and I love playing in Victorian world like that anyway. And that was deliberately written in the style of Dickens as much as I could, as much as anybody could do it. You can't really write like Dickens because you're not Dickens, but just the way that he frames a story and that kind of thing, I tried to sort of emulate that a bit.
Yeah, the influence is really clear. It's really nice actually because it's great to see the the contrast to the M.R. James influence that you get in a lot of the other stories. Because this one is just as strong. The Dickensian here is just as strong and pronounced.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very intentional. So I'm glad that that comes through.
Definitely did.
Yeah. I find it's nice because there's that classical meets more of a modern thing with all of these stories as well. So they all read very classical. They're all written in a very classical way, but then you've got the elements that are more modern. Not particularly in that
Definitely.
story, but in the in the other ones that are very modern.
Yeah, definitely. It's that marriage of the traditional to, it's traditional forms married to like postmodern imagery. I find that
Yeah.
often
I always like
happens.
that. I like reading that and watching it in horror films as well as doing it myself, where you will have a very Victorian setting. The characters are Victorian, the buildings are Victorian stuff, but then, like you said, that with the tree, the image of the supernatural thing itself, whatever it is something that an actual Victorian writer would not have come up
Would
with.
just simply not have,
Yeah.
would not have,
Yeah,
yeah, it just wouldn't have been there, yeah?
yeah.
Or they
Like
would
like
have,
if you like Paul Kane's the Servants of Hell, the Sherlock Holmes book,
yeah,
with the Cenobites in. A Victorian writer would not have come up with the
of
Cenobites.
course not. I mean,
So to put them in a Victorian setting and do it so flawlessly
yeah,
is brilliant.
yeah, it is amazing. I mean, what would have happened is they would have implied, because that's what
Yeah,
Victorian writers were great at. They'd have imagined it, the imagination would have been there, but they just
yeah,
wouldn't have dared to write about it. They wouldn't have
no,
dared to explicitly write about it.
not
You,
that level of graphicness. You
no
wouldn't have
way,
had no.
no way. You find that throughout Victorian horror writing, where they
Yes,
just go. I mean, the classic is Stoker, obviously. I mean, Stoker.
yeah,
Stoker draws back enormously when it comes to the more vivid images. It didn't stop like Victoriana getting their waistcoats into a tizzy over it, because they did, they really did. But he just draws back, so he doesn't explicitly state what's going on.
yeah. That's very true. Yeah, it's funny that you get so many versions of Dracula such as the one that's called Bram Stoker's
Yeah.
Dracula, which are filled with like
Oh, it's
bare
just
dress and flowing blood and
yeah.
everything, and yet that's not actually ever
Nope.
explicitly put in the book.
Well, like most Victorian horror stories, it's epistemological. It's a journal story. It's
Yeah,
it's so everything has already happened. It's told in hindsight, and it's told from the impressions of characters who weren't really there when stuff
yeah,
happened. So the book, ironically, despite having all of this this very oral, wet imagery, is actually kind of dry.
yeah. It is
You
very
know?
much so. Yeah, I agree.
It's kind of difficult to read in many respects. It isn't. I don't think people who come to it not having read it really like it very much a lot
No,
when they
because
first read it.
you can't. It is now impossible to read Dracula without having heard of Dracula.
Right.
So you
Absolutely.
can't come into it blind
No.
because you will have seen Dracula in something. You will have
In
heard of him in something.
in so
You
many
know?
modes and styles and fashions, Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's impossible to read the story and not already know it.
That's what I mean. Yeah, that is a problem. So to find this story, which is then so muted and scaled
Yeah.
back from what you might be expecting, you're expecting this raucous,
Yeah.
bloody, sex-filled like gothic horror, and
It's
what you
not.
get is this diary-filled sort of. I met Mr. Dracula on the 4th of June.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
it's probably going to throw you a bit.
A little bit, just a little bit. I mean, I reread it recently, and I enjoyed it more this reading than I ever have. And what I enjoyed about it more than anything is how sarcastic Dracula is.
Yes.
I never realized before, but he is so funny.
Oh
Like,
yeah,
he
yeah, yeah.
plays with Jonathan Harker like you wouldn't believe. All of the little
Yeah, he toys with him. He
innuendos.
toys with him. Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
a cat playing about with a mouse, isn't it?
the
Yeah,
the slightly naughty little innuendos that he throws about. It's hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious, and I never got that before.
no, I think there's. He kind of. I often feel like if Dracula was written now for the very first time, then Dracula himself would have been blatantly probably like bisexual.
Oh my god, yeah. Oh of
Do you know
course. I
what I
mean,
mean? It's just saying
most of the postmodern like portrayals of Dracula having been like basically
they do.
pansexual, don't they? You
They
know?
do, yeah, because I feel like just logistically, if you've lived for that long,
Hmm.
I mean, people get bored of one partner after,
Right, right.
20 years together. So,
Oh my God.
how long before you get bored of one gender?
Can you imagine how
So,
the freaky stuff Dracula would be into? Bloody
yeah.
hell, having lived, first of all, having lived as long as he has, and also being practically invulnerable.
Yeah, he
The
can do anything.
freaky
He's not
stuff.
he's immune from consequences.
Right.
He's yeah,
The
stuff that's likely to lead to death he'd probably do as well,
My
It's
God, why would you limit yourself? That's the question. Why would you be that finite? Why
yeah.
would you be that restrained? I wouldn't. Um,
No, I think that's something that you can see that he almost wants to be there, but he obviously
yeah,
can't be because of the time it was written.
right.
But that is the kind of thing which is fun to put in. So
Yeah.
if you are writing a Victorian story now, you can have a ghost that's really
Hmm.
horrifically visualized, or
Yeah.
you can have a character that's blatantly, overtly gay
Yeah.
in a way that's kind of repressive towards the other characters who are a bit ooh around it. And
Well,
you know,
it's a reading I've come across of The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Early on, Jekyll points out that he is actually going out, and it never explicitly states what he's doing, right?
no.
But the heavy implication is that Jekyll may be gay.
Well, that story in Grey, isn't it? Whenever it talks about the strange things he gets up to when he goes off at
Mm,
night, it's like,
right,
yeah, we know, Oscar, we know what you're
right.
referring to.
Yeah, yeah, we get it. We understand. And
Yeah,
certainly, ironically, like the gay readers that Oscar was often aiming at would have
yeah,
understood
oh
just
yeah,
completely. Would have
yeah,
understood completely.
yeah. It's just that's it. That's one of the joys of writing in that era, though. And one of the
Mm.
reasons I like doing it. I also do it with my next book that's coming out, which is my Harkins series.
Yes, of
Is that
course.
I like putting modern stuff in it. Not modern stuff as in like the way they talk or the
Right.
technology, but just like something that a Victorian person wouldn't have put in there for
Yeah.
reasons of
But
decency or whatever, but probably would still have happened.
right, which was, well, we know, don't we? We know, like, beneath all of those Victorian manners and values, there was a cesspit.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
repression bred just unbelievable excess.
yeah,
Like, unbelievable. The opium dens, the whorehouses, the prostitution, the rent boys, the just sheer, like, filth of Victorian society underneath that polite veneer
yeah.
is,
I mean, that's even true now. You see that
of
with
course
like
it is.
Japanese businessmen and stuff, don't you? The more you repressed and pushed
Hmm.
down, the weirder it comes out. It's like a coiled spring. You push it down
Totally.
and down and down, and then it just goes boing and flies out in these
Totally.
weird directions. And yeah,
Totally. I mean, the way I always look at it is, you know of like gay dating apps like Grinder and whatnot.
yeah.
Um, Ironically, the most people you find on there on dating apps like that are not gay guys. It's not gay
Okay.
guys. It's guys who have maybe discovered that they're bi later in life,
Okay.
or who are just trying to experiment but have been repressed.
Okay.
It's still all there. All of this repression is still there. It's just manifested in different ways. It's
Yeah.
fascinating. That whole
That's
thing is
interesting. I wouldn't
fascinating
have
to
thought
me.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, right? I know, but there we are.
You
It's
got any thoughts on weird sex practices there?
Rebbie. Yeah.
Not personally. I've read some weird books though.
Hmm.
There was I used to have an encyclopedia of interesting bedroom acrobatics.
Right. Sort of like
You get a
And there's something
Victorian book
there that
full of that though, which is you can.
yeah.
yeah, it's really odd actually when you see things like that come up and you're like, oh, okay, that's not quite what I
Mhm.
was expecting. But in this like encyclopedia that I used to have, it went into things like eyeball licking and all sorts,
Ah. Ah.
which I can't imagine.
That excites something. It's like
Yeah,
almost like no judgment. If that's what people are into and it doesn't harm anyone, go do what thou wilt.
Yeah, I'm all about that.
But for
Yeah.
me
Oh yeah,
personally,
definitely.
for
I'm just
me
with that in
personally,
particular.
that excites a kind of bleh reaction.
Yeah. I'm not sure what it's supposed to. Is it supposed to be exciting for the person licking or the person being licked?
Probably, hopefully both. I
I
mean,
mean,
that's my stance with anything like
I
that.
can.
As long as it's consensual and you're
Right,
both
right,
into it,
yeah,
then do what you
totally,
want. It's
totally. Do
fine.
what
Well,
thou
yeah.
wilt. Do what thou
And
wilt.
to be fair, I have never invited anybody to lick my eyeball. It might be
No.
lovely.
Maybe it's an entire like arena of sexual experience that just not many people get to partake in. But I sincerely doubt I would get anything out of that
No.
other than like discomfort and like a sort of reaction.
Yeah.
You
But
know?
this is the thing,
Potentially
you
some
find a
kind of
lot, you can,
infection.
yeah, you get a lot of Victorian books with that kind of stuff in there, like
Oh yeah.
manuals of, deviant behaviour and stuff. But you
Well,
think, well,
it's
this
like
is how much of it was going on.
right. It's like the horror of the era, though, isn't it? If you look at the Penny Dreadfuls or whatever,
Yeah.
they are like so excessive. They're
Yeah.
so excessive. It's violence, it's gore, it's grotesquerie. It's the stuff that like polite Victorian society was not really meant to wot of, but was there.
That's why it feels like such a juxtaposition. Just can't say that word, juxtaposition, when you put it in there,
Yeah.
because your brain tells you it doesn't belong, but actually
But
it kind of
actually,
does.
it kind of does, yeah.
Yeah,
It's one of those odd things, isn't it? What's actually conditioned us against it is ironically fiction.
yeah,
It's
yeah, it is,
fiction of
yeah.
the era. It's the BBC
Yeah.
dramas or whatever that depict this or that, and they're wrong. Actually, it was probably much more permissive and a lot filthier than we are allowed to believe. Oh, we know it
Yeah,
was. We know it
yeah.
was. We
Oh,
are
yeah.
aware. It's amazing to me that it is amazing to me, and it was such. I mean, I love like the setting of Victoriana, but I hate what it's done to us. You know what I mean? I hate like the resonance of it down the
Yes,
ages.
the values that it pushed on and
Right.
that kind of, yeah.
And that's problematic. That is kind of problematic. But anything that punctures or lampoons that is great, or exposes the
Well,
reality of it.
are you enjoying that in Hawkins then? Because that kind of,
It does. It does really, because like, like he's such a like a he just doesn't give a shit, does he? That's what I like about him. There's
yeah,
a roguish
yeah.
like a kind of fuck off quality to him, which I
Yes, very
like.
much. Yeah, yeah. Now he doesn't really go into it in the first book, but I have written him as being bisexual.
Right, right. Well, the vibe is bi,
I've
definitely.
had a couple of people. Laura said that.
The
Laura
vibe is
Melrose said
bi,
that, and I
definitely.
said that is very intentional. It's referenced more in the second book
Yeah,
for reasons that are relevant to the plot, but in the first book, his sexuality doesn't really come into it because he's all about Maria.
right,
But
right.
I tried, so he's not. You're not going to see him getting off Wheel of Men or anything like that. But the way he is in himself, I tried to kind of imbue him with that
Yeah,
energy, and you're the second actual LGBTQ person who's
yeah.
actually said that. So I'm glad I've actually achieved that with him.
Yeah, definitely. The vibe is bi off of him, definitely.
But that's fun
Definitely.
to put in there because there'd have been loads of people who were like that. But
Of
again,
course
through
there
these like
were.
cozy BBC dramas, you think everyone's so chaste
Mm,
and perfectly up,
mm-hmm,
everyone's all polite and doesn't do sex, and it's all,
mm-hmm.
So I've Harkins as someone who's deliberately aware of how bullshit
Yeah.
this society is whilst living in it.
I mean,
That was very fun to write.
well, the irony was there were people like that. Oscar
Of course
Wilde
it would
was,
have
was one
been,
of those
yeah.
people. Oscar Wilde was one of those people. He wrote about the hypocrisies of Victorian society all the bloody time.
Yeah.
All the
Yeah.
time. And he was excoriating about it.
Oh yeah, yeah. Very critical of it.
Absolutely excoriating about it. So yes, it does exist. It does exist. Right, guys. Well, thank you both so much
Thank
for
you.
coming. It's been a pleasure. It's been an absolute pleasure having you both back on. It's been wonderful discussing Whistle Past the Graveyard. By the way.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for doing it. It was very. I always struggle to talk about my own work very much, so it's nice to have both of you on and to kind of do that because I always sort of clam up a bit talking about it, particularly when people are doing nothing but praising it.
It's
I've just got
hard,
that
isn't it?
natural
British discomfort to that.
Yeah,
But,
I know
to
the
talk about
feeling.
the origins of the story and to branch out what the references are and all that, I enjoy doing that.
Brilliant.
That's fun.
Brilliant. Very happy to hear it. Thanks so much, Rebbie, for coming back on, by the way.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure.
It's really nice, actually, because obviously doing what I do and just writing and putting it on the blog and stuff like that, I try and promote it as much as possible, but actually getting to chat to somebody about what they liked about a book is it's nice. It doesn't happen very often.
It's a lovely thing, isn't it? Especially under current circumstances. My God, it's really nice. You know, my usual avenues for that aren't available at the moment, so you know it is kind of nice. Beyond that, I'm sure we'll all be back very, very, very soon. There will definitely be something. Rebbie, if you can think of anything you'd like to chat about, please drop me a line of some description. Lex, I'm sure we've got loads to talk about.
We've got Gravity Falls. It could involve Rebecca with that as well.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
She's recently watched Toy Story 3, so she's doing the Pixar films, because we said about Pixar films as well.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah, I'm going through the deliberate trauma of watching things at the moment.
Are you, you know, I was going to ask, are you seeing like a therapist after Toy Story 3, you know?
I had to have a rest.
Yeah, right. It's not, you know, I think we need to talk about that one, actually.
We'll do a Pixar one, because there's a lot to unpack with them, I think.
As I mentioned before, guys, all links to everything we've discussed, Rebbie's blog, to Lex's books, to some of my books as well, all in the bar down there. And until next time, bye-bye.
Bye.
Ha ha ha!